All right, folks, welcome back to Truth and Liberty. As I mentioned, our guest today is Dr. Simone Gold. So honored and excited to have you on Truth and Liberty today, Dr. Gold.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, so you are the founder of America's Frontline Doctors, and you were catapulted to fame in 2020 when you and some other physicians held a press conference on the steps of the United States Supreme Court. I understand that video went super viral around the world and was really sort of maybe the launching pad for I would say the counter-revolution. In other words, people who were daring to speak up against the COVID regime that was being unleashed on the world at that time. What led up to your decision to hold that press conference?
Thank you. I was practicing emergency medicine for 25 years, board certified emergency medicine, and that was my career. I should mention, unusual though, that I'm also an attorney. So I do have a bit of an interesting background, but I had really made my career in the emergency room. And I was practicing, when COVID came. And just like I'd been practicing for the previous 25 years, I practiced during the SARS-1 scare. I practiced during the Ebola scare. There's been lots of pandemics, epidemics that I, as an emergency physician, have managed and gone through. This one was being handled exactly the opposite of all ways you're supposed to handle respiratory pandemics. It was just the opposite. You don't vaccinate in the middle of a respiratory pandemic, for example. You don't tell everybody to stay home. You protect the vulnerable. That's all you do. You protect the vulnerable. You actually want the virus to go through the community. The resistance, it builds up in the children, essentially. The viruses traditionally get weaker, and that's just kind of how they go. And we were doing everything exactly the opposite, specifically in ways that violated our constitutional rights. That's what got me very alarmed. So two things propelled me. One was early treatment medicines worked, and the medical public health system was saying we couldn't use them. They were saying to patients, stay home until you turn blue. That was unacceptable to me as a physician who took the Hippocratic Oath. And the lawyer part of me was highly alarmed at the rapid loss of our individual inalienable rights that are given to us by God, but are guaranteed by our Bill of Rights and Constitution. So I started fighting back.
And I remember that press conference. I remember seeing it like so many millions of other people on Facebook or wherever it was that I saw it. But I remember hearing you and other doctors talk about how hydroxychloroquine had been around for decades, safe medication used for all sorts of things, as a prophylactic and as fighting infection and other stuff. But all of a sudden, it was too dangerous for COVID. Can you comment on that? Where was the science to back that up?
Yeah, there's no science. Hydroxychloroquine from then until now is one of the safest drugs on the planet. For comparison's sake, it is safer than Tylenol. It is on the World Health Organization list of essential medications that all nations should have. At that time, it was FDA approved for 65 years. It's rumored that George Washington gave a precursor of hydroxychloroquine to his troops. It has been around forever. It is over the counter in most of the world. It just happens to not be over the counter in America and other first world nations for other reasons. But there is no argument that it's not safe, except that the government started saying that. What was really strange and proof positive that the government was lying was that in my case, the California State Medical Board sent letters to all California physicians saying that we could lose our license if we prescribed hydroxychloroquine, but only if we prescribed it to COVID patients. In other words, in that same letter, it said we could prescribe it for our typical uses of rheumatoid arthritis, systemic lupus, SLE, no problem. You could prescribe it to those patients for decades, but you just couldn't prescribe it to COVID patients for 5 or 10 days. There you go. I don't know what more proof you need that the government was lying when it has internally inconsistent documents. So this also got me very alarmed. I was alarmed that you had petty bureaucrats telling doctors how to practice medicine. That had never happened in my career. We also had pharmacists refusing to fill doctors' prescriptions, which not only had never happened in my career, I knew as a lawyer is illegal. I don't know if you know this, Richard, but pharmacists are actually not allowed to even inquire as to your diagnosis. People don't know that. I happen to know that. A pharmacist is not allowed to ask you what the reason for medication is. It has to do with patient privacy. So there were a lot of lies, and it was intolerable.
Did the government, say in California, for example, did they inform physicians as to why it was not being allowed for COVID?
Yeah, it was classic doublespeak. I still have a paper because we went into litigation for 4 years. I sued them. They came after me, and I went after them.
Yeah.
No, they just said that it's not a proven modality. And I know as a physician that actually has nothing to do with it. As they say, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China?
Hmm.
It's up to, if a drug is approved, it's FDA approved, it then is the doctor's prerogative to use a drug or not use a drug per their professional understanding. And if the doctor happens to be wrong or disputedly wrong, you end up in a medical malpractice suit. There is no scenario where the government gets to practice medicine. That just is not a thing. So I knew they were violating the law. I mean, I knew they were violating the law. Many doctors didn't realize it as aggressively as I did, but they knew that it had never happened before in their careers. So it was very scary to me as a lawyer, as a citizen, as a lawyer, as an American. It was very scary.
Well, this sort of announcement, I remember it was a little bit late in coming. It seemed like as some doctors and some sources were saying, hey, this is effective, try this, hydroxychloroquine. And then suddenly the CDC or HIH or whoever on high was making this decision, then started to say, no, it's really not safe. What was really going on here? I mean, I know that's the $64 million question, but let me ask it this way. How is it that powers that be, whoever and whatever they are, I want to talk about that today, how are they able to control so many doctors, so many hospitals, so many clinics with sort of this Orwellian uniform speaking messaging system that we saw? It was so creepy and spooky, and I always wondered, how are they so effective at controlling everybody and everything?
Right. So there was a lot of reasons that would take an hour to explain, but the easiest one to understand is that my father was a doctor, and in my father's day, doctors were small business owners.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in that world in the 70s, in the 80s, as a child. That was the world. The doctor was a small business owner. He answered to his patient. That has completely flipped. So in my dad's day, 90% of doctors were small business owners. They answered to their patients. Now it's the reverse. About 10% of doctors, maybe 15, maybe at most, are small business owners. They are over 85, 90% of doctors work for a large corporate employer. It could either be a large hospital chain or it could be a large insurance chain like Kaiser. But because of that, the doctors during COVID followed their paycheck. Just like other Americans, by the way. There were a lot of Americans who, for example, took the shot that they didn't want to take the shot because their employer forced them. So doctors did the same thing. I think it's shameful that doctors didn't understand that they have to answer to a higher authority. But that's the short answer.
Well, and tell me if I'm right or wrong on this too, but today, as opposed to in the 60s, 70s, maybe in the 80s, patient Smith is no longer direct paying the bill. It's being paid by an insurance company or by the government through Medicaid, Medicare, or some combination of these things. And so the decision making gets synced down to a really small number of people. Am I right about that?
You are correct. The big enemy of the people, by the way, it's not really big pharma. Big pharma has been incentivized poorly. Like we've incentivized them to keep doing vaccines because vaccines have no liability. So in fact, they emphasize making vaccines over other products, in my opinion, because they have a shield there. But you could align big pharma's incentives perfectly with the consumer, right? If that's my hope that Kennedy can get some of that done. That's not really the problem as an industry. It's malaligned, but it could be fixed, in my opinion. The big problem, the big enemy is the insurance companies. The insurance companies are dictating everything. So the average American spends $2,000 a month for a family of four on insurance. They may not realize it because their employer might be paying it. But if you're a small business owner, you absolutely know that that's the dollar amount. And what are you getting for that $2,000 a month? You're actually getting worse than nothing. Not only are you being charged 2,000, you have copays and you have coinsurance and you have deductibles and you can't pick the doctor you want. And if your insurance changes and your employer changes, then your doctor changes. So there's really no relationship now between the doctor and the patient. It's really the patient and the insurance company, and the doctor in his own way is answering to the insurance company as well. That's another complicated story. We all saw that during COVID, that the doctors were getting paybacks on the vaccines.
Mm,
So it's very sad. And one of the things I'm working on, which I don't think we have time to talk about today, was a free market solution to this mess. And that's
yes.
goldcare.com. And that's national. And we help you with all of your medical problems. Goldcare.com. I can't advocate it highly enough. In this way, you'll start taking the power and the freedom back. And you will notice, shockingly, that medical care is not as expensive as you've been led to believe. Like, what are you
Mm,
getting for that 2,000 a month? You'd be shocked how much less expensive it is if you take ownership over it. It's hard to convince Americans of this. Insurance is like mother's milk. It's like weaning somebody off the breast. I don't mean to be vulgar, but that's like how close it is to the American citizen. Like, they think health insurance is necessary. In fact, if you come to goldcare.com, we will teach you how to go off health insurance. Might surprise you, might surprise your audience. I have not had health insurance for
wow.
more than 10 years, more than 10 years. The reason is I've always known the system was broken. That doesn't mean I'm financially irresponsible, right? I have to protect my assets. If something, you get a big,
Mhm.
expensive, diagnosis, right? Or an accident, you need to have a financial safety net. Of course, that's what insurance is for. But that is not what health insurance is these days. Health insurance is the enemy.
Oh, that's fascinating. So goldcare.com. Now, you,
Goldcare.com, we teach you. We teach you
you,
how to become medically free.
uh, I have health insurance on myself, but I don't have it on my per se. I have other stuff to protect against the catastrophic thing, but I don't think we need it if
You
you're in reasonable health, especially. But
everyone needs, Richard, I hate to cut you off. I'm so passionate on the subject. Everyone needs a catastrophic plan.
mhm,
After the catastrophic plan, you need to pay out of pocket, because then you're the owner of the decision. You make better financial decisions. You pick all the doctors you want. The reason I never had health insurance for more than 10 years, it wasn't even financial. It was because, as a doctor, I'm an insider. There's no way I was listening to an insurance company regulate who I would go see.
mm,
Heck no, I'm in charge. I wanted to be a cash pay patient because I'm in charge. So we teach people exactly how to get off of insurance, save a ton of money. If you're a small business owner, you need to come to Gold Care, because you're throwing money away. And by the way, if you're a patriot, if you're a Christian, you're with your health insurance, especially if you're a business owner, you are funding issues and causes that are diametrically opposed to your beliefs. We can get you
wow,
off of that. Like, I'm
wow.
sure you're paying somehow in your life, you, Richard, are paying an entity that is in diametric opposition to what you believe. That's
I'm
really why I built Gold Care.
okay. Maybe we can circle back to this later
Yeah,
in the show if
I
we have
know. There was
time.
too much.
And if not, please come back on and we can talk about the system more.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
But
digress.
no, it's totally fascinating. But speaking of the system, so we talked about how insurance companies are the enemy, but why did they lie to us about hydroxychloroquine? What was the financial incentive there?
Yeah, so that took us a few years to put together. I didn't know it myself. They were saying it's not effective. That's one conversation. It looked like it was effective, but at least that's a back and forth kind of intellectual conversation. But all of a sudden, people were saying it wasn't safe, which was ludicrous. So why the hatred poured on hydroxy? Well, it turns out that by law, you could not release the shots quickly if there was any other effective treatment. Now,
Ah,
that makes sense, right? Our law says you can't release something on an emergency basis if there's something tried and true that works. That's common sense, and
mm.
that's our law. So they had to do everything they could to show that there was no other treatment, to roll the shots out very rapidly.
Well, Dr. Gold, that's a level of corruption and wickedness that's pretty shocking to the conscience, isn't it? That you would take the health care of millions of people with a potentially deadly virus and lie to them about it so you could make money on vaccines or so-called vaccines. Is that what we're saying here?
Yes, and they are so-called vaccines. They're not actually vaccines. They're not at all by the definition, traditional definition of the word. They're also brand new mRNA technology that's never been
Hmm.
used in this way. They were brand new. They were untested. They were created using the spike protein. The spike protein is very thrombogenic. It forms clots. Clots are essentially bad. They cause heart attacks, they cause strokes, vascular obstruction, clots are the enemy. They also are wrapped in what's called liponanoparticles, which actually cross the blood-brain barrier. They were known to not just stay in the injection site, but to go all over your body. They were known to collect in the ovaries. I mean, there were all of these terrible things that were known essentially, and yet they unleashed them on the whole world, on the whole world.
And how did the vaccine so-called manufacturers control the insurance companies that also controlled the doctors? How did that happen?
So one of the things I say is there were people that had multiple interests, but they all happened to be going in the same direction. So vaccine manufacturers, for example, I call them, it was like a dispassionate financial interest. They want to sell their product, right? So they're pushing for the vaccine. You had the what I call the useful idiots. Those are like the media talking head who tend to turn left. Anyway, that's kind of the orientation. So they're like, just follow the government, follow the government. You had what people I called smug intellectuals. That'd be like Gates or Fauci, who just thought that they were God. These are people who tend to be godless and think that they're God. It just so happened they all were going in the same tyrannical direction, like one world government direction. It suited the truly nefarious, the Klaus Schwabs of the world, to pull everybody towards the left, towards a one world government sort of state. It just so happened they were all moving in the same direction.
Well, and we also remember from back in those days that this wasn't the only lie. The lie about hydroxychloroquine.
Oh, no.
The lie about the vaccines being safe and effective. Now, we can talk about that later, but I'd like to zero in on the origins of the COVID. I guess it's SARS-19 was the actual name of the virus, but we were told that no, it didn't originate. It's not a China virus. Oh, it didn't originate in a lab. This came from some meat market. It's carried by bats. This was all completely fabricated.
Yeah. So that was another thing that, all you had to do was be curious. In the beginning of 2020, I just was curious. I was like any other person, but maybe I was more curious than average. But did this make sense to you? So when they said that it was from a bat market, I'm open to anything. Okay, bat market. I actually went to Google and I Googled Wuhan, and within less than a minute, I discovered that in Wuhan, next to the bat market, like 4 miles away, is the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The Wuhan Institute of Virology is a biosafety hazard lab level 4, which is the highest level in the world. Turns out it's only 4 miles away from this reputed thing. Turns out it's the only BSL-4 in China. Turns out that China's had lab leaks of their level 3 labs. This is the first level 4 lab. They did not have a good safety track record on even their lower labs. And it's right next to where they said that the bat market happened. I mean, this just begged credulity. Then I went to scientists. So that part anyone could have figured out themselves. And I think one of our senators, Tom Cotton, I can't remember who said it first, and they mocked him for saying it. But it begged credulity to think that it just came by accident when it's right next door to this fancy lab, right? And that they've had a history of having leaks. Then I went to some of my scientists and I found out that the way the SARS-2 virus is, it can't happen in nature. As my smart scientist friend explained it, they said it would be like Bambi with fangs, right? You don't have a deer with fangs. Like, it's just not possible. There were just portions of this virus that could not have happened naturally.
Right. And there was genetic mapping or whatever you call it of it that proved that it.
Yeah.
And then it was disclosed later that actually the United States government had made grants to the Wuhan lab for gain of function testing that was also withheld from the public.
There was a lot of shady stuff. We'll just say it was very, very shady. We were funding money and we were pretending we weren't funding money because Congress said you can't do this, you can't give them money. And then Fauci just gave them money anyway.
Why wasn't there more questioning amongst public health officials, like say at the state, county level, even at the national level, saying, wait a second, this is against all of our training. We shouldn't lock the country down. We should locate the vulnerable and protect them. Was there any pushback internally there, or did everyone just say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, follow the orders?
I want to share something so important. Public health doctors are not doctors. Overwhelmingly, they're literally not doctors. They're not medical doctors. They have maybe a biology degree. They go off, they get a master's, and then they end up in the field of public health. And the whole field discipline of public health is actually a yellow beret leftover. They're like almost like they're the derivatives of the Vietnam War protesters. Very interesting. Dr. Robert Malone wrote the epilogue in my book about the history of our public health service. And it's shocking. It is nothing like being a doctor. I know that that's the first time you're hearing that, but
Yes, it is.
Dr. Malone has educated me heavily on this. People with MPH after the name, sometimes they're doctors, like, Fauci is one,
Hmm.
but overwhelmingly they're not doctors, but they also have an entirely different mission. Your doctor that that you have a relationship with, that's the doctor-patient relationship. Public health officers are trying to kind of improve in the aggregate some global belief that they have. It might be about gender, it might be about pregnancy, it might be about food availability. It's kind of a big global thing. It is not about the doctor-patient relationship. It is not surprising the public health doctors and the public health industry went hard left against the interest of the individual patient. I seriously don't trust anyone with an MPH after their name.
And I would love to talk more about that. Let me just say, sometimes people in that space, they call themselves doctor, but that's because of a PhD, not an MD. Is that true as well?
Yes, I'm alerting people. This is almost like breaking news in a way on your show. I'm
Hmm.
alerting people that the concept of public health is not this benign thing. We've always thought of doctors as benign. They're looking out for us, right? It's a doctor,
Hmm.
right? We
Yeah.
trust them. Whatever belief and trust you had for doctors, separate that in your mind from the public health field. Public health field is not made up of people whose goal it is your individual health. That is not their goal. Their goal is some kind of collective, whatever's like in vogue at the moment. It could be climate change. It could be gun control. It could be not having children, right? It's all about, reducing women's ability to have pregnancies. That's public health. And I think it's actually in diametric polar opposite to what being a doctor is.
One of the other things that's striking about the COVID pandemic as we look back is the level of coordinated censorship, and not just censorship, but also cancel culture that was rolled out and implemented. And we've learned now that the United States government was through the FBI and the CIA was actually communicating with social media companies and social media giants to accomplish this. And you were one of the victims of it. Am I right about that?
Very much so. The landmark case you might be referring to is Missouri v. Biden, became Murphy v. Biden, Murphy v. Missouri. And yeah, we have absolute proof. Hundreds and hundreds of pages of discovery showed that multiple branches of federal government were telling the social media companies to censor various people. The reason this is so illegal is if a government can't do it themselves, right? If the government knows it can't censor me, for example, the government is also not allowed to outsource censorship. So the government is not allowed to tell Facebook or Twitter or Instagram to censor me. But that's exactly what they did. They outsourced their censorship. There is absolutely no doubt. This is 100% fact. We have all of the evidence, all of the discovery. If you're curious, look at the Murphy v. Biden case. It's all laid out. I think every American should read that case, the discovery. This was very scary to me. I've been an advocate I'm a free speech absolutist. That's who I am at my core. I know that all the ills of society are coming from people being censored. After the censorship is the propaganda, right? First, they silence the dissenters, and then they
Hmm.
fill your head with nonsense. So we were heavily censored. I was one of apparently the 10 or 12 most censored people in America, which is amazing, right? Because
Wow.
10 minutes earlier, I was just a well-regarded doctor.
Hmm. Yeah, and your video that we talked about was taken down. People's entire YouTube channels were taken down. I'm not sure yours was, but the censorship was all over the place, and the propaganda. Oh, it's safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective for the vaccines. And everybody that was talking about hydroxychloroquine was called a source of misinformation, and on we go. If I recall correctly, even the Biden White House wanted to set up a Bureau of Misinformation.
Yeah.
How Orwellian is that?
Right. And they did. They did. They had a lot of they essentially did that.
Yeah. Well, but am I right, Dr. Gold, that the Supreme Court really missed the target in that case? They ruled that
Yes.
that was not a violation. The government activity did not violate the First Amendment. There was no civil rights cause of action.
We very disappointed in the Supreme Court on this one. It was 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I think. Maybe it was 3 years ago. But but they didn't exactly kill it. They sent it back to the lower court, which is a lot of times what these judges do, justices do. They don't want to really decide or they can't agree amongst themselves, and they sent it back. So the case is actually still proceeding, but they should have given an outright victory to the American people on the side of free speech. I mean, the evidence was overwhelming that the government was ordering the social media companies and legacy media companies too, right? Like the USA Today and New York Times to censor. The evidence was absolutely overwhelming.
Well, and so the thing that in and of itself is horrifying. But what ought to be really horrifying to people is that the mechanisms and communication channels and all of that was already in place for them to do that. So that means how long have they been controlling what's said and so forth?
I'm going to share with you, Richard. It's not. They were developed very early in the Biden administration. That came out in the Murphy v. Biden case, which is that they started having I forgot what the names of the meeting were called. It's in one of my chapters. It had an acronym for them to communicate with each other. So all of a sudden, the head of the CDC had a direct line to Facebook. I mean, literally had a direct line. Those channels like that rapidity hadn't happened before. They started in the March, April of when Biden in 2020. March or so of 2021.
So before we went on the air here today, you mentioned Bill Federer, a good friend of mine. Bill talks about the Hegelian dialectic, which is where a totalitarian government will create a crisis they can't achieve their full goal right at once. So they'll create a crisis and people out of fear will rise up and they will compromise so you can move the normal. And then you create another crisis to move the normal again. And you compromise in the middle, but eventually you reach your goal of the totalitarian regime. After an experience like the COVID regime and pandemic and all of that and all the loss of civil liberties and everything else that's happened, I'm afraid, Doctor, that we have compromised in the middle because we have not yet cleansed and purged our society and culture of the evil schemes that were rolled out. In other words, the left learned some real valuable lessons on how to do stuff, and we think it's all taken care of just because the disease is over. What do we need to do to clean this thing up and make sure this can't happen again?
You are exactly correct. There has been no accountability, and it's really difficult to move forward without accountability. But as you're saying, it's actually dangerous because we've kind of opened the door to that, and we didn't slam it shut. We didn't say, heck no, we're not going there. We're not doing that. You know, a classic example of what you're describing is when the leftist cities, they defund their police, they don't have good police, and then there's a lot of crime, and then the people themselves demand more observation and more cameras everywhere, right? So people start demanding more of a security state because their government has put them in such a bad position that they felt they needed that for their own safety. But they caused that, right? You're moving towards totalitarianism by your own decisions, and I think the exact same thing has happened during COVID. I agree with you completely.
Where was the incentive for the government to get involved in this whole thing regulating speech? I mean, were politicians being paid off by drug companies? Was there some global conspiracy, people pulling levers at a global level on this thing? The World Economic Forum, the Chinese Communist Party, George Soros folks?
There's a couple. Yes, that's also a very sophisticated question. So there was financial incentives on Big Pharma. Big Pharma donates to everybody. I have endless empathy for Bobby Kennedy Jr. because that's an impossible job. Big Pharma runs the federal government, not the other way around, except for really Donald Trump. So yes, Big Pharma absolutely was a big donor to Biden, for example. So he was happy to do their bidding. Now, World Health Organization, the guy in charge of that is a CCP puppet, right? He works for China. Everybody knows that. I mean, people who investigate these things know that. Yeah. Tedros works for China. So the interests were there. The question is, why did all the doctors go along with it? I think we've changed as Americans. We're not maybe the same people we were when we stormed the beaches of Normandy. We've gotten a bit too complacent, too comfortable.
Well, let's talk for a minute. There's some other subjects we got to get to today, but let's talk about the subject of vaccine injury. So my third son was born with autism. God has healed him after about 14 months of prayer and faith and other things like that. He's 100% normal, very smart, very capable now. But I believe that it was the onset of it was caused by my wife taking a vaccine for the bird flu or swine flu or something during her pregnancy, plus a brown recluse spider bite and maybe some other things, just studying it. But the whole thing of being against vaccines, it's like you can't allow common sense to enter into this discussion. You're either sane and a normal person, or you're one of those crazy anti-vaxxers. But with the COVID so-called vaccine, there can be no doubt that this thing caused serious harm to a lot of people. And yet, are we really even having an honest debate yet or discussion about what harms did it cause?
No, and one of the terrible harms is just the gaslighting it's done to people. I mean, think of all the people that got harmed by the COVID shot. These are all people who took the COVID shot early.
Yeah.
I mean, there were young kids that took the shot early that had strokes, for example. You can't make this up. You can see them. They have had a stroke. They're weak on one side. And those are people that are now being called anti-vax. I mean, those are people lined up first and foremost. So I hate the dishonesty. I hate the fact that the doctors are not curious. I hate the fact that for 25 years in the ER, when a child came in with SIDS, nobody thought to ask about their vaccine history, not the paramedics, not me. It just wasn't part of it. We were specifically trained not to be curious, not to seek the data. And it's very suspicious. I can't tell you exactly what the incidence is. I can't tell you exactly with your child if it was or wasn't, because we're not looking. We're not looking. And I find that very suspicious. We look at everything in medicine. We tell pregnant women, you can't have sushi, you can't take a puff of a cigarette, but you can take the new stuff? Well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's suspicious.
Well, tell me if I'm right on this, but the vaccine adverse effect reporting system, VAERS, that the number of incidents reported to VAERS for the COVID shot was more than all other incidents for vaccines combined since the system was set up.
Oh yeah, it's something like 95% or 98% of all the vaccine injuries. It's an enormous number.
And the adverse effects include, like you said, blood clots, strokes, nervous system injuries, miscarriages.
Miscarriages, correct.
All kinds of things. Comment on this, if you could. You did a little bit, but the technology was mRNA. How is that different than a normal vaccine?
Everything about this was different. First of all, the big definition of a vaccine is that it stops the transmission of the thing, right? So why would a healthy person inject something inside of them? It has to be incredibly safe. If you've got cancer, you're willing to take a risk. But if you're healthy, the thing that the government or your doctor's giving you really needs to be absolutely safe because you're already healthy. So the risk profile for vaccines has to be pretty much 100% safety, and it wasn't. We have what's called in the VAERS system safety signals. Safety signal is when it reaches a certain amount, alarm bells start going off. For comparison's sake, in the 1970s, 76, I think, Gerald Ford stopped the administration of the swine flu vaccine because there were 25 deaths. 25. There's something like 45,000 adverse events in the VAERS system now. And we know that the VAERS system is capturing at most 10% of what's out there. We know that from biodata. So how do you reconcile that the president in charge when the swine flu came out halted the program with 25 deaths, and yet we've let it go on with tens of thousands? It's
incredible. So you are now working to fight against the transgender ideology, specifically the mutilation of children and all that. I want to talk about that, but before we transition to that, real quickly, what are the reforms that we need to make in our health system to stop this from happening again?
Oh my goodness. I would say if you're looking out for yourself and your family and or your small business, you need to have a direct relationship with a doctor you can trust. That honestly means a doctor that you're paying, the doctor that you're paying, not an insurance company, not an outsider. With that relationship, just like you might have with a lawyer or an accountant, you're going to have some chance of getting the truth. Maybe the doctor's woke, maybe he isn't well educated. I can't answer to that. But at least there's an honest relationship. So for me, it starts there. It starts with a doctor who you can actually trust, not one you think you can trust. We saw a lot of doctors that people thought they liked, and yet they did the wrong thing. I would say you need to be paying your doctor directly. To do that, you need to wean yourself off of a policy that pays the doctor. There's
Hmm.
many ways to do that, but I don't see any other way to protect yourself than with somebody who's working for you.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about the transgender mutilation of children, if we can, for a minute. You've created another documentary. This one is called What is a Doctor? Can you tell us about this film?
I want everyone to watch this film. You can go to Salem now and watch What is a Doctor? And I walk people through what does it mean to be a doctor? And when you go to a doctor, what are you expecting? Are you expecting a healer, a teacher, a coach? Or are you expecting somebody who's working for the government, who's just following government orders? And I walk people through with many other doctors. It's a documentary where we interview lots of doctors. And what happened during COVID and the similarity now with all the transgender surgeries. The children have been subjected to having their body parts mutilated, like chopped off, either by drugs or by actual surgeons, chopping off their body parts at the behest of gender activists. I can't say it more strongly than that. And the doctor groups have gotten behind it. The American Academy of Pediatrics, one of the most shameful medical cabals on the planet, is okay with, chopping off genitals, chopping off breasts of children. So this movie explains all of like what has gone wrong with the doctor and how you can find a doctor that is going to look out for you and not some other interest.
And we have major medical institutions across the nation, big, reputable healthcare corporations and hospitals that are involved in this. Is there big money in this thing, this gender mutilation of kids?
So here's something people don't realize. Every child who undergoes these mutilating procedures is about $1 million to the system because it's not a single surgery, right? It's a lifetime of medical care, a lifetime. You have multiple surgeries, you have cosmetic surgeries, you have complications. About 35% of them have bad complications, chronic infections, chronic wounds. They have anorgasmia. They can't have normal relationships with people. They need multiple surgeries, reversals. It's $1 million per patient, right? So this was big money to certain institutions. Thank God President Trump is in office and he put a stop to it. He put a stop to it almost immediately. And now these activists are running scared. Their big activist group called WPATH, shameful, horrific group that hijacked the doctors essentially, has plummeted. The membership has plummeted. About 65% have quit.
Wow.
The doctors all over the nation, I think, are running scared a bit, which they should be, because if you chop off children's body parts, you should be in prison. I'm an advocate of putting a few of these doctors in prison. The whole thing will stop.
Wow. Well, the White House just released a press release shortly before our show listing a bunch of very prominent hospitals from California to the East Coast that are canceling their transgender surgery programs. But we've got about a minute left. Can you talk about this whole thing seems to be wrong on the front end and wrong on the back end. What I mean by that is, what are the indicia that tell a doctor that, yeah, you ought to perform this surgery, other than this girl's a tomboy or this boy likes music and art, and some nut job is saying, oh, they're trans. And then on the back end, where is the evidence that this helps them with their psychological condition in the first place? It seems to me we're missing the mark on both places.
Yeah, the short answer is it was fabricated. There is no evidence that supports that. The children will overwhelmingly grow out of this if you let them just go through puberty. The evidence is absolutely clear. The industry was hijacked by activists. Some of these activists happen to be doctors, but it was collective lunacy, much like the Salem witch trials. I mean, it was just collective lunacy. The part I'm angry about, though, is that doctors were profiting financially off of this. And the moment you stop giving them money to do this and you put a couple of them in jail, the whole industry will stop, right? They need to go to jail. This is called medical battery. You're not allowed to just chop off a body part. If a parent came in to me and said, my son doesn't like his left leg, can you please chop it off? And if I chop it off, I'm going to jail. That's battery, right? Why is it any difference if it's your breast or your penis?
Do they often have the parents are manipulated into consenting to this, and how does that happen?
Yeah, they actually tell the parents, would you rather have a dead son or a live daughter? That's what they tell them. Elon Musk tweeted out a couple of years ago that he went through this. So the richest man in the world was hoodwinked with this lie as well. This is what they tell him. In fact, the risk of suicide goes up if you go through all these problems, if you go through all this medical treatment.
Yeah, so the dead son or daughter, meaning, oh, if you don't do something, they'll end up killing themselves because of their so-called gender dysphoria. But most of the time, statistics show people grow out of these feelings. Not everybody, but it does happen.
We can't do this justice in this time frame because everything about it was wrong. They don't have gender dysphoria. They have something called rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is an entirely different disease process that they will grow out of. This is kind of a social contagion through YouTube. It's like teenage girls. It's entirely different than gender dysphoria, which is always attached to middle-aged men who cross-dress. Think in your mind sort of like transvestite. Okay? I'm overgeneralizing. Go see What is a Doctor if you want to understand this story.
Well, we've said a lot in an hour, but we're out of time. Dr. Gold, how can people find your movie really quick?
Thank you. So if you go to, well, why don't you just go to follow me on X, and it's Dr. Simone Gold, Dr. Simone Gold, and you'll be able to find the movie at the top there. I just wrote this book, which is amazing. You can find it on Amazon. Selective Persecution. Wow. It talks all about Fauci and all about, the FBI and the DOJ.
Oh, amazing.
And just follow me on X. It's amazing.
All right. Dr. Gold, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a great opportunity or honor to speak with you. And thanks to all our viewers for watching today. We'll see you again next time on Truth and Liberty.